Anki is an extremely powerful app.
Det är möjligt att jag inte kommer ha tid att gå ut. Det är möjligt.
It's a pretty simple app to use and to understand. However, like I said, it's really powerful, largely because of how the free-spaced repetition scheduler algorithm is programmed. And in my opinion, really the best part of Anki is that it's easy to turn this into a quick daily habit. Well, I spend somewhere around 45 minutes a day going through my Anki deck. I try to get it done in the mornings, but sometimes it winds up waiting for the afternoon, or on days like today, probably the evening. Now, that might be a little bit too much of a time commitment for you. I mean, you be the judge. For language learning, and especially language retention, however, Anki really is a godsend. Now, a lot of people who use Anki use these pre-constructed decks. And sure, I suppose some of these pre-constructed decks could be useful, but you really need to be careful. Many of the decks have examples that simply are not natural, and it can take a long time to sort through these sentences and get rid of the ones that really aren't helpful. There's also a much bigger problem with just using pre-constructed decks. Usually you're seeing the sentence or the words or whatever inside the deck for the first time when you first come across the word, sentence, phrase, whatever it is in Anki. That might work for you, but usually it won't. Trust me, I've done it. In fact, it can be really frustrating. There's a reason why the Anki manual tells you to understand things before you try to memorize them. In fact, learning before memorizing is actually the first 2 of Super Memo's 20 rules of formulating knowledge and learning. You need to understand what you're learning before you can learn it, something that should be obvious to you. In theory, you could approach a foreign language book like Dream of the Red Chamber, my personal favorite, and try to learn it sentence by sentence. But if you have no background in Chinese at all, this is going to be an extremely frustrating task and will likely take you a lot longer than it should. This is why Super Memo warns here against what it calls blind learning. Now, this is a really important point to make, and the temptation to not follow this rule is much stronger than you think. I mean, I run into it all the time, even to this day. There's always this temptation to just take something that you don't understand and throw it into your Anki deck and figure that when it comes up, you'll miraculously figure out a way to understand it. It never works that way. You've got to take the time to learn and understand whatever it is first before the magic of Anki will work for you. The second point, of course, is to learn before you memorize. But what we're talking about here is to have a bigger picture of what you're trying to learn. So let's take a look at a linguistic example. So the very first sentence of Dream of the Red Chamber is actually pretty simple. 此开卷第一回也, or this is the first chapter of the book. However, to understand this sentence, you have to have at least some knowledge of how the Chinese language works. 此, for example, means this, though it tends to be a little bit more literary than the more common word 这个. DE is an ordinal number, the first one. But to understand this, you need to understand that D represents ordinal numbers. And the verb in this sentence is technically ye, which works like an equal sign. It's called a copula. But the thing is that you don't need to know the linguistic definitions of these words or of these terms or any of that for this sentence to make sense to you. What you need to understand is how this stuff works and how it fits in, and you need to understand it in the abstract. So in other words, let's say you downloaded an Anki deck and it had that sentence. Remember, it's 此开卷第一回也, and you were trying to use the deck to learn 18th century Chinese, you would likely be lost. I mean, you can't jump in and just start memorizing this stuff without at least understanding how this stuff works first, understanding which word is playing which grammatical role in the sentence. That's why we say that you should learn before you should try to memorize. And that's another problem, by the way, with using a pre-constructed deck. You're not really learning the subject matter before you start using the deck. Now, the obvious solution to this is to simply make your own cards and decks. I showed you a little while back how I organize my notes and cards in Anki. It is a little complicated, but the nice thing is that you only really need to set this up once. And the really cool part is that you add new cards really quickly, provided that you set things up right. So what you have to understand about Anki is that it's set up essentially like a database. Now, if your database is well organized and it's easy for you to understand, it's going to also be really easy for you to make really cool stuff happen. But if your database was made by somebody else, or if you don't understand how it works, or if it's a mess, it's going to be really frustrating. And if you've set stuff up in a way that makes sense to you, adding new cards will be easy, and it will also save you a ton of time. If you look closely through the Anki manual, you'll come to this section here about uploading cards through spreadsheets. To understand this, let's take a look at this sample spreadsheet. This is the one that I'm working on for this month. There's not much in it. Every single one of these columns corresponds to a different field in my Anki Chinese notes. Now the reason why you want each column to be a different field from your notes is because that's how it will be imported into Anki. Now, the theory behind this is that, say you're reading something in your target language while you've got this spreadsheet open, or maybe you're watching a TV show, or you're listening to a podcast, whatever. Anyway, you come across a word you don't know, and you look it up, and you start that learning process right away. The spreadsheet basically becomes your notebook. It's your record of learning. And if you want, you can even wait a little while before you import it to your Anki deck. I usually do it only once a month. It's actually really easy to import these files into Anki. First though, you have to make sure you have a program like LibreOffice installed on your computer. As you can see here, Anki recommends using LibreOffice to convert your spreadsheet to CSV format. Now it can work in Excel, but there are a whole ton of extra steps. It's honestly easier just to use LibreOffice. Plus, of course, LibreOffice is free and open source software, which really should be important to you. I strongly recommend supporting free and open source software developers. Anyway, you want to save your documents to CSV format. I tend to divide my documents into two files, one with normal words and one with sentences and phrases. This is because I have two different sets of notes for the two types. Once you have them saved to CSV format, you can import them directly into Anki. Now, if you're crazy like me and you have multiple note types, you need to make sure that you choose the right note type before you import. Also, if you're crazy like me and you use subdecks, make sure that they go into the right subdeck. Overall though, this importing process takes something like, 5 seconds. And this is the reason why I strongly recommend using Anki instead of making index cards by hand. When you get the system going, it can be really quick. It doesn't take me any extra time when I read, since I would be looking up words that I didn't know anyway. And by doing it this way, I have complete control over what my definitions look like, which words I want to include, which words I don't want to include, and which sample sentences and phrases I want to stick in the deck. In other words, my deck is my deck, it's not someone else's deck. Next, I'll show you how to add sound. I usually just go to Browse and search for notes that don't have anything in the sound field. Then I select all and go up to this Hyper TTS menu. Now, to get the Hyper TTS menu, you have to have the Hyper TTS service. I strongly recommend going with the paid service for $5 a month because this will get you the Microsoft Azure voices, but of course you don't have to. Anyway, the cool thing about Hyper TTS is that it will save default voices depending on the deck and the note type. What this means is that you can literally click one button and get everything done. Now you do have to go through one language at a time, which might take a minute or two. But as you can see here, it works, and the quality of the voice is actually really good. When I learned how to do this a few years ago, it completely changed the game for me. I had been using earlier text-to-speech services, but the pronunciation was always way off. Once I started using the Microsoft Azure voices, everything just worked better. But of course, what you really want to do if you can is you really want to use native speaker audio. Now, if I found a native speaker's pronunciation for a word like Jianman, I could stick it into the sound column of my spreadsheet. I would write it like this. Now note that this is just a random file name that I came up with. The brackets mean that it's in HTML format. Anki will recognize this right away. So if you find audio files from websites like Forvo or Wiktionary, you can prepare native speaker audio files for your cards while you're studying instead of trying to find a ton of them all at once. I like to keep a folder filled with these sound files, and when it's time to import them, I then move them over into my collection.media folder like this. And as you can see, sometimes I wind up with duplicates. It's not a big deal. And because I've already written this file name into that sound field, I don't have to worry about my sound file being overwritten. Remember that we searched only for the notes with nothing in the sound field, so once you've got it figured out, it's a pretty powerful system. And the best part is that this means you can spend most of your Anki time actually studying, not making new cards by hand. Making cards by hand isn't awful, but it is a little bit awkward. Personally, I find the spreadsheet importing system a lot faster and a lot easier. Anyway, this takes a little while to get used to, but once you get into that flow, it adds maybe a few seconds to your study time. And the other secret is that you can use other types of media. I'm talking stuff like pictures. In fact, when you start playing around with this stuff, you'll start realizing that Anki is useful for more than just studying for an exam or for med school or for learning a language. Anyway, I hope this helps, and I'll have more tips for you soon.